Hi as well. I decided to record this session in advance so that you have the opportunity to pause it whenever you like, and then I'll be sat on Teams ready if you have any questions. As you know, you're going to be attempting to write an essay on this next Friday, so the more notes that you've got in advance, the better it will be. So we're going to look at key features of planning a response, and we're also going to be just recapping the poems and the kind of key features of Tess in order to help you to plan your response to the essay. So we are going to just recap the key things in song I Fond Kiss by Robert Burns, a poem about lost love. So I fond kiss and then we sever, I farewell and then forever. Deep in heart-wrung tears I'll pledge thee, warring sighs and groans I'll wage thee. Who shall say that fortune grieves him, while in the star of hope she leaves him? Me, nay cheerful, twinkle lights me, dark despair around benights me. I'll never blame my partial fancy, nothing could resist my Nancy. But to see her was to love her, love but her, and love forever. Had we never loved so kindly, had we never loved so blindly, had never met and never parted, we had never been broken-hearted. Fare thee well, thou first and fairest, fare thee well, now best and dearest, like the ilka joy and treasure, peace, enjoyment, love, and pleasure. I fond kiss and then we sever, I farewell, alas, forever. Deep in heart-wrung tears I'll pledge thee, warring sighs and groans I'll wage thee. So immediately we get the sense that this is definitely about parting, but he is using the violent verb of sever, which makes us think of, rolling heads rather than an actual parting. So it's definitely something he sees as an extremely violent thing. It was actually apparently based on the woman is supposed to be Agnes Maplehose, who was a married woman who separated from her husband, and it was an affair that Robert Burns apparently had with her. He calls her Nancy in the poem to, I guess, protect her reputation, and Agnes left Scotland in order to travel to America in an attempt to reconcile with her husband back in 1791 when this was written and published. So that's why it seems so personal, because it was very personal to Robert Burns. But obviously it says Nancy to protect her identity. And as ever, with any sort of historical information like this, I suppose we have to take it with a pinch of salt. Based on letters and evidence that we have, the majority of literary critics do believe that it is about Agnes. So if we go through it, looking at the first stanza, I fond kiss, then we sever, I farewell, then forever, we have got the rhyming couplets going all the way through, and it's very rhythmic, and that might suggest his acceptance of the situation. It does begin in an emphatic way to allow the subject of the poem, the lovers, that they can be together, and they have one loving kiss before they are part. Fond does have two meanings though. One means loving, but the other kind of means foolish. And Burns might be castigating himself for loving unwisely. Obviously, we can't help who we fall for. That is a famous idiom there. But he is perhaps chastising himself for not having a very good choice, because ultimately, choosing to fall in love with an already married woman in 1791, where you haven't got a chance of being together at all, probably wouldn't have been the most logical thing to do. So heart wrung is very concise. The grief and internal conflict is conveyed in the warring sighs and the groans, and there is a circularity of the structure. So you will notice as you're reading it, then we sever, one kiss, then we sever. It is cyclical, it keeps being repeated, and it is repeated at the end of the poem. You should also note the battle imagery as well. We've got semantic field of battle, we've got sever, we've got warring sighs, and I'll wage thee. So he may, I guess, invoke this classic idea that love is a battle. And this is something that, although we don't really see it that much in Remember, because it's more about a peaceful parting, Tess definitely is someone that has to battle and struggle against love and trying to achieve what she wants from love. So the next stanza, who shall say that fortune grieves him, while the star of hope she leaves him? Me no cheerful, twinkled lights me, dark despair around benights me. So here he juxtaposes hope, expressed as fortune and the star, and its opposite, which is dark despair. We've got celestial or astrological imagery, and it suggests they are fated to separate. It makes us think of Romeo and Juliet with the star-crossed lovers. It's out of his control completely, but generally, if we don't, I don't know what it is about human psychology, and literature tells us this, the more that we actually try and avoid falling for someone, the more that we want to be with that person. So the two opposites are important themes in the poem. Like, he wishes that they were fated, but they're really not at all. Both of these lines also end on me, and he also refers to himself in third person as him. And we get the sense that it is quite a self-centric poem, based on how he's feeling. He's indulging his emotions very much in this poem. So the next one, I'll never blame my partial fancy, nothing could resist my Nancy, but to see her was to love her, love but her, and love forever. So he refuses to blame himself, which is not unusual for a male writer, but he believes that it was impossible to resist her. She's like this femme fatale or this siren, he can't help it, it was inevitable that he was going to be heartbroken. The rhythm is typical Burns. If you look at any of his other poetry, the language is very simplistic. But it's quite ironic because he says my Nancy with a possessive pronoun of my, and she's not his Nancy. She wasn't his to begin with, and she can't be his. You could take it even further and say the half rhyme between her and forever illustrates the fragmented nature of this everlasting love that he wants. He might love her forever, but this isn't a great love that is going to last forever, partly because of the societal constraints that you weren't allowed, to have an open affair with a married woman. She wouldn't have been able to get divorced, they would never have been accepted in society, and that's perhaps why she fled to Jamaica to try and start anew when no one really knew her, and knew of her disgrace. So the next sort of stanza, had we never loved, say kindly, had we never loved, say blindly, we start with anaphora. So that is one repetition of the same words as are used at the start of this sentence. It's used because Burns admits that he was foolish, and that he was blind to the reality of embarking with a married woman. But it's this idea that love is blind, and that's another cliche that we see in literature and in life in general, that we can't help who we fall for and that love blinds us. We've got a use of conditional tense of never met, never parted, never been broken-hearted, and that constructs an alternate reality, which allows Burns to share regret at loving too deeply. And perhaps he sees love as pain and pain as love. They are synonymous with each other. That is something that definitely Tess experiences, because she is someone that suffers deeply whilst being in the state of love. So the part that we've gotten to with Tess fits perfectly for this. She really is in love with Angel, but it gives her nothing but grief because she can't be with him because he won't accept her, and she also can't let him go. In terms of society, in terms of linking in social context, she is also already married, so she can't move on. She can't actually embark on another relationship at all. She is stuck completely. So the next one, we've got some more anaphora. So farewell, fare thee well. You see the Scottish dialect coming out. Fare thee well, our best and dearest. And we've also got superlatives as well. So superlative, remember, is something which is the best that it can possibly be, or the most that it can possibly be. And he is saying that nothing will ever compare to Nancy. You might look at it cynically and think that's how everyone feels every time they have a breakup, that they'll never love as deeply again. But modern society definitely contrasts to these kind of writings, and suggests that it is possible. So Burns does build up the important nouns that describe love as compromised. We've got the dialect word of ilka, which means each. So be each joy and treasure, peace, enjoyment, love and pleasure. And what starts as happiness moves to capitalise concepts. So peace and love. And looking at it more positively, it's almost like their love has opened them up to the essence of understanding. That actually being with her, even though it was wrong, gave them the experience of emotions in the abstract, that he would never really have understood what it would have been to have true peace, true enjoyment, true love and true pleasure if he didn't go through this experience with her. And you get the sense that if she would be happier leaving, he would let her go because he wants to see her happy. even if it's not with him. And ultimately, that's quite a selfless view of love. Then we've got I fond kiss, then we sever. So we've got some more acceptance. Sever again, as repeated as that violent verb, because it's really painful, but he knows that he has to let her go. The reader is open then to the reality of their feelings and their grief rather than the abstract other things. And the circular or secular structure is complete, and we get the sense that the pain of the parting will always be with him at least throughout their lives. And we go back to that warring imagery as well. Warring signs and groans are wage thee, because he knows that this is going to be an internal battle. He might have physically said goodbye, but actually mentally and emotionally he's still going to be tied to this person. So there's a lot in there in terms of, because your essay question is about loss, that you could definitely use that do have crossover links with both Tess and Remember. So just a bit of a recap of Remember. So I know that you know this poem really well already. It is something which is far more positive, I suppose, and it is something that has a very nice contrasting view to both song and Tess. Just to remind you, this is a form of Petrarchan sonnet, and a Petrarchan sonnet is usually used to show how true their love is towards someone. It is quite sacrificial. She sacrifices her personal desires as an expression of true love, with the idea that she says, if you should forget me for a while, or better you should forget and smile. She doesn't she doesn't see herself as mattering as much as the person that she loves, and that is a very selfless view of love and of loss. So it fits with the pre-Raphaelite philosophy of acceptance and death, and the material troubles fading when compared with struggles of the mind. So she is trying to be as positive as possible when she goes away into the Silent Land. And as you know, the Silent Land could be a metaphor for either death, or it could be for a parting, because as we know, Christina Rossetti, though she was very popular and was proposed to a few times, never actually got married, never accepted anyone. So just looking at the structure, because I know that you'll know the narrative really well by now, you will see it's got an A, B, B, A rhyme scheme, and it has got this steady rhythm which suggests acceptance. The octave, so the first 8 lines, is reconciled to the idea of death, whether it's emotional death or physical death, and she has not yet made peace with the idea of being forgotten. But then in the 9th line, so the volta, the tone changes and she gives up the need to be remembered. And then the sestet, so the final 6 lines, sees her wish that her beloved will find happiness again, even if it means that she is forgotten. So planning a response. So your question that you're going to have a go at next Friday is explore how loss of love is presented in Tess of the D'Urbervilles song I Fond Kiss and Remember. So what I would like you to do during this session is to use a double page spread, but it doesn't matter, do whatever you find easier. You can write this in on paper, or you can do it on a computer. You're going to be coming up with similarities and differences between the 3 texts, but always coming back to the idea of loss. It will mean you've got really detailed notes to have a go at writing this essay next Friday. So some prompts really are to get you to think about the different types of loss which are presented. So we've got loss of love in the sense of a breakup or a death, but just some prompts from Tess, for instance. Tess experiences a loss of innocence when Alec rapes her. That is, I suppose, according to Alec, a type of love, a possessive love that he has over her, and it costs her the loss of innocence and who she is, and a loss of identity. You could argue that in Song I Fond Kiss, Burns is experiencing a loss of identity as well, because he's very confused and doesn't really have much of a purpose by the end of the poem. It seems trapped in this emotional turmoil instead. You could even argue that Alec claims to be trapped in emotional turmoil as a result of Tess's impact upon him as well, but that'd be a little bit more difficult to see it from that side. You can look at chapter 14, the physical death of sorrow, Tess's loss of faith in the church. So that's quite a common one in terms of Victorian context, the loss of love of religion, and religion was a defining characteristic of Victorian society. You could also look at that with Angel as well, and how he has a crisis of faith when he finds out that Tess was another woman in her shape. You could also look at chapter 35 and around that sort of area, where Angel physically leaves Tess after the confessions. So essentially, you are hopefully going to be doing 3 comparative paragraphs in your essay. So 3 comparative paragraphs in your essay where you look at different types of the loss of love and how it's presented, but you're going to be looking at similarities and differences. So just to help you a little bit further, so one thing that you might choose to look at is the idea that happiness is seen as a sacrifice in terms of the loss of love, or that pain and love are an inevitable pairing. And this is a similar connection between both poems and Tess. So Tess, quite often, so she does this a few times around chapters 34 and 35 and chapter 40, she articulates the view that she wants to make Angel happy. Her only wish is to make him happy, even if it means that she has to sacrifice her own happiness in order to do it. Ideally, she would like to be included in the relationship as well. She's a bit surprised when he turns around and says that he needs to go to Brazil, but nevertheless, she is happy to sacrifice her own happiness if it means that Angel is going to be happier leaving for Brazil for a period of time. That causes her, a lot of pain personally, and that sacrifice as a theme repeats throughout the novel. But it's this idea that she would like to prioritise the other person more than herself. Connecting that with song Hawthorne Kiss, we could look at the idea of happiness as a sacrifice there as well, when he accepts that actually having the relationship with his lover gave him peace, enjoyment, love and pleasure, and he articulates the view that he didn't really have an understanding of what those things were before he had the relationship. So it articulates the view that I suppose he is wondering whether it's better to have loved loved and lost than than not loved at all. But because she gave him those things, he now understands that he has to sacrifice his happiness, and that's kind of like a payment for the experience, I suppose. He does accept it all the way through, and then we sever. It doesn't matter how painful it is, he does accept it. He sacrifices his own happiness rather than fight for her, rather than make her stay. Possibly because in the context it would have made, for quite the scandal, and it would have made their lives incredibly difficult. And that's, whether she even wanted to be with him after the end of the affair or not, given that she went to Jamaica to try and reconcile with her husband. It's another connection with Tess and with Song Hawthorne Kiss in context, really, because we have Angel who escaped to Brazil, partly because, it's the furthest place he could probably think of to escape this scandal. And then here we have a real life example of, in 1791, someone escaping to Jamaica, which is, again, news probably wouldn't travel that far. Your reputation would probably be safe in that area of the globe. Then looking at the Volta, so the 9th line, the turning point of Remember, where Christina Rossetti says, better by far you should forget and smile. She is happy to sacrifice her memory, the sentiment that the other person felt for her, her own significance, because she wants the other person to be happier than she is. And I guess you could argue that's partly what love is and how it's conveyed in literature, this idea that you will prioritise another person, even if it's as a result of your own misery. So just to go back, this lesson then, after you finish making any notes, is to start planning your response on explore how loss of love is presented in Tess, Song and Remember. So I'm going to suggest that you do a double page spread where you've got really detailed links of similarities and differences, just to remind you of your AOs. So AO1 is just responding to the question, so just make sure that you're aiming for 3 detailed paragraphs in your essay with different types of loss of love, really. Aim to make sure you keep coming back to the loss of love, because that's AO1, that's responding to the question. AO2 is where you're using specific subject terminology. So if you know that there is a semantic field of pain, or there's a violent verb, or there is some anaphora, and you could say something about it with relevance, please do it. AO3 is context, so it's thinking about the significance of the time and place of writing. So think about the loss of love, the reasons why Tess suffered, why she was punished in context. Think about song I Fond Kiss, why they couldn't be together, given that it was an affair, and it was 1791. And think about remember, so the context of what you know about Christina Rossetti and how she actually never gave her heart to anyone. AO4 is then your connection. So if you are comparing similarities and differences, you will naturally be doing this. And then the last one, which I don't think you practice too much because you have to be brave, get a little bit opinionated with this. AO5 is where you debate different interpretations of the evidence. So this is where you kind of think, well, is the loss of love presented, in a more positive or negative light, and why? Does someone truly accept it? Are they truly willing to sacrifice their own happiness, or ultimately are we just selfish creatures that don't want to lose love at all? So really have a go, guys, at planning this. So the more you can do, the better it will be when you have a go at your essay next Friday. And I will be on Teams should you have any questions.